Okay, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Glad to be reassembled with you once again for our Bible study hour. We are in Matthew chapter 12, and when we are viewing this section of our study, when I'm reading this, I view this as a shift that takes place in the work that Jesus is doing. And as we're going through and studying about the work that Jesus is doing and how people are interacting with it, we are also able to learn how it is that people are going to start by interacting with us. So up to this point, we have seen Jesus doing His work, teaching, helping those that are in need, and that He is facing a great deal of criticism. But with this chapter, the criticism is going to quickly shift into direct conflict. That no longer are the Pharisees simply just going to be huddled up with themselves, talking amongst themselves about what is happening and what Jesus is doing. They are going to go toe-to-toe with the Son of God and start in this chapter accusing Him and trying to trip Him up in His speech. Now, with Matthew chapter 12, there is a section within this study, or in this chapter, that a lot of people want to focus on, and thus they think this is really the only thing that this chapter is dealing with. Anybody have an idea as to what that subject would be?
The Sabbath day.
No.
What's the question?
There's a section in this chapter that a lot of people want to get focused on, and they want to make this chapter all about that. Like, oh, this is that chapter. Like how in 1 Corinthians 11, it's about the head covering. Like, oh, that's the head covering chapter. Okay, verse 31, wherefore I say unto you, all manner of sin and blasphemy shall be forgiven unto men, but the blasphemy against the Holy Ghost shall not be forgiven unto men. Now, we're going to address that. We're going to deal with it. But everything that's starting in this chapter is setting up the foundation for that discussion. What does it mean to blaspheme against the Holy Ghost? All of that's going to be leading up to that section. So as we're saying, there's more to this chapter than just that. We have three conflicts that are going to take place between Jesus and the Pharisees, scribes and the Pharisees. Now, I know with our gospel meeting, we have moved way ahead of where we are in our Bible class, but I think that's actually to our benefit now that we have gone through and done such a detailed study about the Pharisees, that as we start going back now and we start going into this, we're already way ahead of the game. We're way ahead of the curve. So when we're considering the conflict that we're about to discuss, about to get into, I want us to go back and just briefly look at everything that's leading up to this. So Matthew 3, 5 through 7, the preaching of John, and how that John, in his preaching, the Pharisees and Sadducees came to his baptism, and he says to them, who has warned you to flee from the wrath to come? John recognized already the problem with their attitude, and it's showing and it's engaged in his preaching, that he in fact is warning them early of judgment if they do not change. Jesus will be involved in the same type of teaching, preaching, as we've already studied in Matthew 23 with our gospel meeting. He says to them in that chapter, how shall ye escape the damnation of hell? So way back here in the beginning, they're hearing it from the start. You jump to Matthew 5, 1 through 19. Jesus then begins showing the contrast between the attitude of the religious leaders and the attitudes of those that are going to be in the kingdom. The proper attitude toward self, proper attitude toward God, and toward others. Matthew 6, there's a contrast between hypocrite, the hypocrite, and thou. Here's how the hypocrite behaves, but here's how you or thou are supposed to behave. And he's showing these attitudes. Drop down to chapter 6, verses 21 through 23, and he has the discussion about, for where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. This will come back into play in this chapter, Matthew chapter 12, in some of the discussion about the Sabbath day. And in verse 23, Jesus says, but if thine eye be evil, thy whole body shall be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness? We are going to also see this again. in the discussion with the Pharisees in chapter 12. So keep this in mind, because this will explain the conflict that we're about to witness. If the light that be in thee be darkness, then how great is that darkness? The Pharisees had the light of God. They had the Scriptures. They had the Word of God. The Son of God is right there in their midst. But that light that's in them is darkness. And you end up being a witness just how dark that darkness is that's going to overcome that light. And so we see here, this is also going to play into what Jesus has to say about the blaspheming against the Holy Spirit. Matthew 7:1 condemns the judging of people based upon self-righteousness, and he teaches on how that in fact will come back to you if you're going to do that. Trying to judge motives, trying to read the heart of people and not measuring by God's Word. It will come back on you. Matthew 7:6, we have the description of the Jewish leaders. Dogs, swine, you don't give that which is holy unto the dogs. Do not cast your pearls before swine, for they will turn around and rend you. Matthew 7:12-14, we have the mentioning of the two ways. Now all I'm doing is just trying to refresh us and get us up to speed where we're going. The two ways, straight and narrow, broad and wide. One leads to salvation, eternal life. The other leads to destruction. Verse 15, we have the discussion of the bewaring of false prophets who are ravening wolves. Verse 15, definitely it's going to be directed at the Jewish leaders. Not only the Jewish leaders, but even after the church is established and the apostles are going out and spreading the truth of the gospel, you have Judaizers, false brethren, as they're described in the book of Galatians, or the letter to the Galatians, that are coming in and trying to deceive. 21-23 of chapter 7, you have the false claims that are being made. Have we not done this, and have we not done that, and done these mighty, wonderful works? And yet Jesus will say to them, depart from me, I never knew you, you workers of iniquity. And then 7:24-26, you have the discussion of the two builders, the wise man and the foolish man. The wise man is the one that hears and does. The foolish man is the one that hears and does not. A clear description of what we have with the Pharisees, because that's exactly what you have in Matthew 23. They say and they do not. Chapter 9. Here we have the Pharisees making the statement, and behold, certain of the scribes said within themselves, this man blasphemeth. In the healing of the paralytic man, not just simply healing him, but saying, making the statement, thy sins be forgiven thee. But then in this chapter, we are able to view why it is that the conflict is starting. Notice what happens in verse 8. Here's the mentality of the Pharisees, verse 8, but when the multitude saw it, they marveled and glorified God, which had given such power unto men. Chapter 9 is where you have a shift in power. When the multitude would look to the Pharisees as being top dog, now Jesus comes along and he does this, and not only does he do this, but he has the power to forgive sins. The multitude sees it, they marvel, and it says they glorify God. And it's at this juncture that things start bleeding into where we are. 10-13, we have the statement being made. The question is raised, why does your master sit and eat with publicans and sinners? And this is where Jesus says in verse 13, but go ye and learn. We're continuously having this contrast being shown to us. Here are the religious leaders, and they're being told, you need to go back and restudy this. You have not been reading your Old Testament correctly. You drop down to 32 and 33 of Matthew chapter 9. And they went out, behold, they brought to him a dumb man possessed with the devil. When the devil was cast out, the dumb spake, and the multitude marveled, saying, it was never so seen in Israel. But notice what the Pharisees said. The Pharisees said, he casteth out devils through the prince of the devils. So this is already being said. They're going to say this again in Matthew 12, but here's the first time that they said it. The first time that they say this, that the miracles done were not by divine power, but trying to claim that this was done by the power of Satan. And so they are trying to align Jesus with Satan, and this is going to come into play in chapter 12. Verse 36, But when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion on them because they fainted and were scattered abroad as sheep having no shepherd. Again, this is the failure of the Jewish leaders. Chapter 10, you have Jesus selecting new leaders. We know in Matthew chapter 16 that Peter and the other apostles are told that when the kingdom comes in, when the church is established, that they in fact will sit on 12 thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. You're not going to look to these leaders anymore. But now I'm choosing these men. And in the selecting of these men will become great leaders, contrasted to that of the Jewish leaders that they had. And so all the way through this, you have the Pharisees continuing to resist and resist until it comes to a head. In this chapter, we're going to see it explode. Matthew 12, verse 1. At that time, Jesus went on the Sabbath day through the corn, and his disciples were an hungered, and began to pluck the ears of corn and to eat. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said unto him, Behold, thy disciples do that which is not lawful to do upon the Sabbath day. So here's our first conflict. And it is centered around the Sabbath. What is it that a person is able to do and not do? What we're going to find out, what we're going to have presented to us, is that Jesus has an altogether different view and attitude of the Sabbath day from that of the Jewish leaders. When we are considering this discussion, the Sabbath day is working as a piece of the whole. This really is not just about the Sabbath day, but this is about the entire Jewish system. That if you are not going to properly understand what the Sabbath day is all about, then you're not understanding what the law is about. So this commandment stood for the whole of the Jewish system. And one reason that that in the whole of the Ten Commandments, this Sabbath day is very peculiar. What makes this commandment different from all the rest? This one different from the rest of the 9.
The other ones are things you do to people.
Okay.
That's my first
Okay.
thought on it. That's what spoke to me.
All right.
Could you make your statement or ask the question again?
What makes the commandment about observe the Sabbath day, keep it holy, how is that different from the other 9?
It's kind of hard to pinpoint what you're saying because I'd like to say that they're not supposed to harvest, but I'm not, are they?
Well, just think about the other 9.
Those are do, and this one is do not.
Okay. All right. When you're thinking about the Sabbath day, the 7th day, is there anything really holy about the 7th day?
Except that God said it.
Okay, so it's just another day of the week until God steps in and says, you need to observe this day. The other 9, thou shalt not kill, shalt not commit adultery, shalt not covet, have no other gods before me, shall have no graven images. How would we describe those laws? Are they just arbitrary laws that God is making? Those are moral laws. Those deal with morality.
So this would be a spiritual.
This is a spiritual situation. This has no spiritual significance other than God said, you need to do this. And here's the reason why. So again, we are going back into the discussion of God not just simply giving us laws for the sake of giving us laws. There's a purpose behind this law. And that if you're not recognizing about this law, then you're going to miss the entire thing. So the 4th commandment, keeping the Sabbath day belonged strictly to the Jewish system. And even in the book of Deuteronomy, you have Moses retelling the people, God did not make the covenant that we are under with your fathers, but He made it with us at Horeb, Mount Sinai. The institution of the Sabbath day is specifically and particularly for these people. But the other 9, thou shalt not kill, wasn't that before the law of Moses? Wasn't it wrong for Cain to kill his brother Abel? All right, what about adultery? Wouldn't adultery still have been wrong under the Old Testament, or excuse me, during the patriarchal system? Absolutely, because Jesus in Matthew 19, how far does He go in His discussion of marriage, divorce, and remarriage? All right, He doesn't go to the law of Moses. He goes all the way back to the beginning, in the garden. These were laws that were in place way before Sinai, except for this one. And they should have realized that in God giving them this, that there's a purpose for it, that there's a reason for it. And so when we consider the purpose of it, the purpose was that it was supposed to help the Jews. This is supposed to be a help, not a hindrance, not a burden. But because the Pharisees are involved in making their own laws, well, here's our tradition about it, here's our interpretation, here's what our rabbis have to say about it, then they start making it grievous. So notice this. The 4th commandment was intended to remind the Jews of spiritual things. You go back to Exodus chapter 20, and you have the description that's being given for the audience there. It says in verse 11, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that in them is, and rested the 7th day. So the reason why they're being told to rest is because in the beginning, this was the day that God rested from His work. And after He rested, God had to get back to work because of Genesis chapter 3. Sin came in. Now man needs redemption. And God returned to His work. He then is telling the people, as they have come out of captivity and they've been delivered from God, or by God, I'm giving you rest. You're no longer slaves, but you're free men. And as being free men, you will get refreshing. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So when they stopped their work on the 6th day, you stop at evening. When they stopped their work for the week, it was to remind them to think of their spiritual needs of the next day. That we are not laboring and that God is providing for us the things that we need. You don't go out and gather. You don't go out and harvest. You're relying, you're meditating, and you're appreciating what it is that God has given to you. And that this was designed in carrying them all the way back to creation. God had provided everything that Adam and Eve needed. Their physical needs, their emotional needs, and their spiritual needs. They were in direct fellowship with God. And so the Sabbath is set in context of the other 6 days. 6 days, you do your work. The 7th day, you rest. So the Sabbath day was to influence how they lived the rest of the week. That's what it's doing. But what is happening, what's going on as we're reading this in the New Testament? Is that what's happening? No. Yeah. Here is God's people, and they are not appreciating what it is that God's given to them. And that in fact they are using what God has given for rest as a weapon against the other people. A Pharisee, or the Pharisees, they've missed this point in considering what the Sabbath day is all about. And look at how they're now behaving. They were supposed to remember God in connection with the other 6 days that they worked. It was designed to start everything back over. That here's a day that we're remembering what God has done, how God provides, and that I'm supposed to do that the rest of the 6 days. The Sabbath day is a reminder that the man whose work is not approved of God is not acceptable with God. They could not rest on the Sabbath and then go out and engage in any kind of work throughout the week. Now that's exactly what the Pharisees are doing. Oh, we'll observe the Sabbath day, but then what are they doing? They turn around and they devour widows' houses. What good was the Sabbath? What good was that day of rest that you're supposed to be in remembrance? They could not go out, cheat, steal, kill, but that's exactly what they're doing. They keep the Sabbath, but then they practice Corban on Monday. They devour widows' houses on Tuesday. What good is keeping the Sabbath? But here they are, playing that role of the hypocrite, and that it's, oh, we're doing this. We keep the Sabbath. Now, so here's another point to be considered when we're thinking about why it is that they would have such a huge emphasis on the Sabbath. Why was Israel punished in the Old Testament? Why were they sent into captivity? All right, disobedience. But we have a specific thing mentioned in their well, there are several things.
Well, they allowed the worship of foreign idols.
Okay, all right,
The intermingling of other people.
Right.
About it.
right. They polluted justice, judgment. The priesthood was polluted. The kings were polluted. But what else do you think? They didn't keep the Sabbath. And in fact, the reason why they were in captivity for 70 years was because it was 10 years for every Sabbath that they missed. Or I should say every Sabbath year. So not only every 7th day were they supposed to rest, every 7th year they're supposed to do no work for the entire year. And they never did that. And God punishes them for the fact that you did not let the earth and the land rest for that year. So is it any wonder, or is it no surprise then, that as they come out of captivity, guess what they made sure to keep? Oh, we learned our lesson. We're keeping the Sabbath. But why? And it got so bad for the children of Israel and their misunderstanding of what the Sabbath was for. I can't remember which one of the prophets it was, but one of the prophets actually describes their mentality that they loathed the new moon. And they hated the Sabbath because you couldn't do any trade. You couldn't be involved in business on the Sabbath day. And it was so bad that when they came out of captivity, one of those prophets actually made a decree that just to make sure that we don't do this again in the future, we're shutting the gates of the city to make sure that nobody is doing any business on the Sabbath day. And thus that's the reason why Jesus warns in Matthew 24 that your flight be not on the Sabbath day, because they were in the practice of locking the gates. And if you've got to get out on the Sabbath and the gates are locked, you're not going anywhere. So here we have them, and they're so fixated on, oh, we got to keep the Sabbath, got to keep the Sabbath. God punished us because we didn't keep the Sabbath. But why? That's what we're going to get into. So it was a day of rest to remind them of the load and the burden of sin. Romans 7:13. Paul writes, and he says, "Was then that which is good made death unto me?" Speaking of the law, God forbid. But here's what the law did. But sin, that it might appear sin, working death in me by that which is good, that sin by the commandment might become exceeding sinful. This is what the children of Israel should have had being pressed on their mind continuously. Why do we have so many laws? It's because you commit so much sin. Why are we having to offer so many sacrifices? It's because you're committing so much sin. And so the Sabbath day had lost this meaning for the Pharisees. The law viewed correctly reminded them of their sinfulness and that God had provided rest. And it ended up being an illustration of God's grace in the Old Testament. And this physical observance of resting on the Sabbath day was supposed to have an impact on the spiritual man. So for individuals today who want to act like, oh, well, whatever is going on in the physical has no realm or has no impact or implication on the inside, you don't understand the Old Testament either. And if you're not understanding what's going on in the Old Testament with the physical things and the spiritual impact, then what about when it comes to the New Testament with the physical elements and the spiritual impact? You're not going to make the connection. And thus, that's the reason why so many of our religious friends have an issue with baptism. How can baptism in water have anything to do with my soul? Well, I don't know. How can the seventh day have anything to do with your soul? You're not studying it correctly. You're not interpreting this right. But Jesus, as we're looking at what He did in going through and picking corn on the Sabbath, Jesus made this decision based upon His authority that He has. He's going to mention that in this chapter. He's going to say, I'm Lord of the Sabbath. And He's already made mention, or there's already been made connection to the authority that He's already exemplified in Matthew 7, 28 and 29, and Matthew 9, 2 and 3. But what we have being presented to us is exactly what the Hebrew writer mentions in Hebrews 10. That all of these things that are found under the Old Testament system are a shadow. The law having a shadow of good things to come. What was the Sabbath day preparing them for? There's a rest that's coming. You don't have it yet. This is just the shadow. The element, the thing that is actually casting the shadow, it's coming. And it's going to be good for you. And not the very image of the things can never, with those sacrifices which they offered year by year, continually make the comers thereunto perfect. They should have been recognizing this. We're not done. This isn't doing anything for us fully, because if it was, we would not have to keep doing this. For then would they not have ceased to offer, because that the worshippers once purged should have had no more conscience of sins. But in those sacrifices there is a remembrance again made of sins every year. For it is not possible that the blood of bulls and of goats should take away sins. You haven't received the actual thing. It's coming. But just because this is not the actual thing does not mean that it's completely worthless. And then you have 1 Timothy 1:9, where Paul again emphasizes, knowing this, that the law is not made for a righteous man, but for the lawless and disobedient. So here are the Jews, and they're glorifying in the fact that God has given us the law of Moses. And what were they saying about themselves? Why did God give them the law? In their thinking. Huh? Because we're so good, God gave us law. You don't have to give law to good people. You give law to the lawless and the disobedient. For the ungodly, for the sinners, for unholy and profane, for murderers, of fathers and murderers of mothers, for manslayers. This is who gets law. There's your reason for having it. But you see, as they are getting so wrapped up in themselves, they're losing sight of the fact. This is the reason why we had to have the law. Now, what's the reason that we have Christianity? What's the reason that we have God's religion today? Because this was us. We were lawless. We were disobedient. And we needed Christ. And that's the reason why Paul writes to the Ephesians the way that he does. In chapter 2, he starts by bringing to their remembrance. You remember how you were before you obeyed the gospel? And how you walked in the way of Gentiles? How you walked in darkness? How you were without hope? Why would we remember that? It's to humble you. To humble you so you do not start profaning. So you do not start taking this for granted. And you do not start thinking of yourself higher than you should. So let's get into Matthew 12 a little bit deeper, moving past looking at the Sabbath day, and let's view some more of the attitudes of the Pharisees. Just consider the little bit that the apostles had. Now remember in Matthew 10, when Jesus sent his apostles out, he put some restrictions on them. He said, when you go out, you don't do some certain things. What were they not allowed to do?
Don't bring a sword, don't bring a money bag.
Okay, no sword, no money bag.
No extra change of clothes.
All right, no extra clothes, no food. Why?
Supposed to rely on,
Go.
I guess, God or the people.
All right, go ahead. That's it. He's already been discussing Matthew chapter 6. Does God not care for the sparrows? Does God not take care of the lilies of the field? Will God not take care of you? And he says, put that in practice. Now, here are the apostles. They're going out. They're doing the work of God. They've not taken any of these things with them. And they are walking, doing the work of God, and they're hungry. Now, here come along the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Here are men going out doing the work of God, which you would think the Pharisees would be appreciative of. What should have been the mentality of the Pharisees seeing the apostles of Christ walking around and they're hungry? Okay, you take care of them. You tend to them. They're doing the work of God. But you contrast that to the Pharisees and Sadducees. The apostles have nothing, but the Pharisees have everything. They have this world's goods. And we know that because they rob widows' houses to get it. And Christ is going to make a connection with the Sabbath that the Pharisees do not like. As they question him, or as they see them going about and doing this, and then Jesus replies, but he said unto them, have you not read what David did when he was an hungered, and they that were with him, how he entered into the house of God and did eat the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, neither for them which were with him, but only for the priests. Now this is when David had to run for his life, fleeing from Saul. And Jesus gives the illustration. Here are the priests in the Old Testament, and they took something that God said, this is for you to eat. And Jesus says they did that which was not lawful. But why? Why would they do that? Do I know? Nobody was involved in helping them, but in fact, is this not what the law was supposed to be preparing them for? The law is preparing them to help others. So in fact, it was lawful. To withhold this from David, who is running for his life and had no time to make provision for himself, to look at David in his despair and then not have pity, to not have compassion, to not have mercy on him with what was happening, then what good was any of this?
Can we make application with what Jesus had earlier said with regard to, if you have something against your brother, basically, you can't worship.
Right.
Because you have to go take care of that. Isn't this following along the line in a way? I mean, not specifically, but it's the same thought process. Your religion has to be toward your fellow man and your other people in practice. Otherwise, you're just going through the motions of the Pharisees.
Exactly. If the priest did not help David in this situation, then everything they're doing is just for ritual. It's just for ceremony. That in fact, and so even here, so the priest, how is it that the priest is being taken care of? By God. The priest is from the tribe of Levi. Levi did not get any land because they were going to be dependent upon God. They are leaning on God for what they have. And now here comes some poor soul and they need assistance. All of that is designed to impress upon their minds, I'm being taken care of, I need to take care of him. So it's the illustration with the Good Samaritan all over again. A priest and a Levi are walking on the same road as the Samaritan. What do? Do they help? They don't just pass by, they cross the street and then they pass by. Don't even want to get close to the situation. Here is religion actually working. Now, in Israel's history, David was the best king that they ever had. And so the Pharisees would never criticize David. Everybody loves David. So Jesus uses David as an example. Okay, here's somebody that you love. And he's doing something that wasn't authorized for him. Why don't you criticize him? So you see, they're unjust in their criticism. They're not fair in their judgment. You hold David up in high regard, but you're wanting to sacrifice, you're wanting to crucify me, metaphorically and literally. But in fact, Jesus also uses this as an opportunity to impress upon their minds who is superior in this situation. All right, not only just God, but who is Jesus claiming to be? Son of God, the Son of David. Here's David doing this, and you have no issue with it. I am greater than David. You should be fine with this. Not only that, you also have verse 5. Or have ye not read in the law how that on the Sabbath days the priest in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? So is it the case that all work is condemned on the Sabbath day? No, it's not. That in fact you still have the priest and they're going about their daily routines even on the Sabbath day. What about them? Oh, they're blameless. Why? Because they're doing the work of God. What's Jesus and His apostles doing? They're doing the work of God. But I say unto you that in this place, right here where Jesus is standing, He says, but I say unto you that in this place is one greater than the temple. So Jesus establishing relationship between the Sabbath and the temple and how that work goes on. And when they, the Pharisees, consider the work of God taking place, this is where they like to confine it. Now, isn't that applicable for today? When the religious world thinks about when the work of God is to be done, where do they think about? They think about here. This is not where the work of God goes on. The work of God is out and about. This is getting us ready to go out and do the work. And Jesus establishes His authority not only over the Sabbath, but even over the temple. Because when you get down to it, that's just a place. So had they properly viewed the Sabbath, they would have seen their needs and anticipated the rest that the Sabbath shadowed but could not give, and looking forward to what was supposed to come. They never complained about the priest and the work that they are doing. If what their interpretation that they're giving was true, then the priest should have died just like everybody else. Exodus 16, no, not Exodus 16, it's later on. That man is found picking up sticks on the Sabbath, and the punishment that was given by Moses when he inquired of God was put him to death. Is it the case that we have exceptions to the rule, like, oh, the priests are just so much better? No, that's not the case. It's just the simple fact that when it says no work, it doesn't necessarily mean all work. Because even Jesus is going to give another illustration in this same chapter about some work that's needing to be done. But not only in this account do you have Jesus dealing with this question, but also in John's account. In an event that took place on the Sabbath day, and then Jesus goes a step further in his illustration. So we have him bringing up David, bringing up the priest. But in John 5:17, notice this. But Jesus answered them, My Father worketh hitherto, and I work. So not only are the priests working on the Sabbath day and offering sacrifices, who else is working? God. Okay, Pharisees, are you going to go so far as to condemn God for working on the Sabbath? Oh, well, no, of course not. Well, okay, then you need to back off. Therefore, the Jews sought the more to kill him because he not only had broken the Sabbath, but said also that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. So you notice, it's just like with the denominational world today. You get them on one point, and what do they immediately do? They shift to another. Okay, we can't answer you on the Sabbath, but hey, you shouldn't equal yourself to God. Deflection. Then answered Jesus and said unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, the Son can do nothing of himself, but what he seeth the Father do. For what things soever he doeth, these also doeth the Son likewise. Jesus says, if you're going to condemn me, you're condemning the Father, because I'm simply doing what he did. And thus he's illustrating to these individuals, to this people, this day is a day of rest, but it's not a day for you to just stop being merciful, stop being compassionate, and ignoring the very things that this day is supposed to have you remember. Matthew 12:7. But if ye had known what this meaneth, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, ye would not have condemned the guiltless. So here Jesus judges the apostles, and the verdict is that they're innocent. They're guiltless, but they're doing work. But why? It's not the case that everybody that does work on the Sabbath is being punished. The Pharisees know that, but they're inconsistent in their judgment. They're being critical. We don't like you. So therefore, we're making this law. We're making this rule. This is a quotation from Hosea 6:6. If For I desired mercy, not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. It's also a quotation from Micah 6. In verse 6, Wherewith shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before the high God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings and with calves of a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams or with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has showed thee, O man, what is good, and what doth the Lord require of thee? But to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God. Now again, when we're considering what Jesus is saying here and what the Old Testament prophets are saying, I will have mercy and not sacrifice. Oh, well, that means we can stop offering sacrifices. Is that what this means?
Yeah.
No. God still wants the sacrifice. But what does He want alongside with it? Obedience, mercy. So again, here is a physical act of killing an animal, and it's supposed to have a spiritual application. God wants sacrifice. He commands sacrifice, but why? What's the meaning of it? The shedding of blood is mercy. That when I'm killing this animal, I'm thinking about, I'm reminded God is being merciful to me. And so how should I be to others? Should be merciful. We're right back. Matthew 5, 21 through 26. So Jamie was, again, ahead of us. That's a good thing, though. It's good that these types of things are already running around in our head and that we're making these points of application. If you bring your sacrifice and remember that you have aught, that you have trouble with your brother, you leave your gift and you be reconciled with your brother, because I'm coming to God desiring for mercy. And then I haven't done that with my fellow man. If I am not merciful, I will get no mercy. Sacrifice was a reminder of one's need of mercy. But my need of mercy means I must first learn to be merciful. Otherwise, I'm not going to appreciate it. If they had understood sacrifice, which showed all of this, which the Sabbath day also signified. God, we are going through the week and we are just being overloaded. All right, take a day off. Just take a break. If they had understood what it signified, then they would not have been unmerciful to the apostles in eating on that day. Here's what they should have been reminded of. Now the Pharisees have seen the disciples hungry, and they have not broken the law. And instead of being merciful, they're critical. Verse 8, for the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath day. Had they understood all of this and recognized the shadowing of the law, then they would have recognized that the one greater than the temple, that the one greater than the Sabbath was here. That this one has come to take the place of these. In John 1 and 2, and then skipping over to 14, you have it being said of the Word being made flesh. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. Lord of Sabbath, greater than the temple. Well, the temple is where God's presence dwelt. But now what do they have? God is not just dwelling in the temple. Going back to Matthew 1, what does Emmanuel mean? God with us. Now we have God in the flesh, and God is walking among them. He is tabernacling on earth, and that's what verse 14 says. And the Word, deity, God, was made flesh. Deity tabernacled, tented among us. But the Jews are missing all of this. They're not appreciating the why of the Sabbath day. And they're just using it as another attempt to put a heavy burden on the people, while they themselves are not going to follow it. So, let's look at some application. If the Sabbath was given to help the Jews understand the meaning of the whole system, you have a need of God's grace. And since they need grace so as to affect their lives, to produce a kind and merciful attitude to others. And here we're reading about them and they missed it. What does that say about us? As scrupulous and as diligent as they were in their study, and they missed it, we need to be careful. Lest we read the New Testament and end up right here with them, and that we miss why we have these things for us today. For example, the Lord's Supper. First day of the week is peculiar to the New Testament. Under the Old Testament, it's the Sabbath day. Well, you get into a new system, you need a new day. Just like with the children of Israel, the day of Passover, that started a new covenant. And thus God says, this is the beginning of your year. You see, He changed things around when things changed. We're now under the New Testament, under this new system, things change. And we have Jesus saying this as He instituted the Lord's Supper. Matthew 26:28, for this is the blood of the New Testament, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. Now, question. Why do we have this memorial? Why do we have this command? Why did He institute this? For us to follow until He returns, to assemble every Lord's Day and partake of it.
Remember God's mercy on us by sending His Son for as our sacrifice, just as we just talked about with the Old Testament.
All right. Here is the why. This memorial is being established because God was merciful to you. My blood is being shed for the New Testament and for the remission of your sins. So every Lord's Day that we come together and we partake of the Lord's Supper, what are we being reminded of? We need God. That if He had not done this, this is where we would still be. We would still be dead in trespasses and sins. That He died for me. It is showing to us, reminding us, we stand in need of God's grace. And what we do today, properly understood, must affect how we live tomorrow. It reminds us that we did not merit redemption. God's love and mercy gave it to us. And so as we go through today And we're going to partake of the Lord's Supper here in just a little bit. In partaking of the Lord's Supper, what attitude will I have when I leave here? Will I leave here and be super critical of others? Will I leave here being harsh, unkind, overbearing? If that is what's happening, then we need to stop and we need to reread and we need to restudy what this is all about. We are not here because we have everything together. We are here because we recognize we have something that's lacking. And I would say to a large degree throughout our brotherhood, that mentality has been lost. That they in fact have fallen into the very trap that the Jews were during this time frame. That, hey, we're showing up to the temple because we're supposed to be here. This is where God says we're supposed to come. This is where the holy people come. And they don't feel their need. And thus, when it comes time for correction to take place, that's why correction is so difficult. Because how dare you say that me, a Christian, member of the Church of Christ, would have any need of repentance? If I'm looking at this properly, I'm going to feel my need all the time. Not just when I'm here. Not just when I'm going through this element. And so, this very mentality is the reason for the conflict in this chapter, and it's the same reason we have conflict with others of our brethren. Because they've missed the point. They have not understood the why. There's the first conflict. Let's look at the second conflict right quick. Verses 9 and 10. So he's answered that. He silenced them on that. And when he was departed thence, he went into their synagogue, and behold, there was a man which had his hand withered. And they asked him, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath days? That they might accuse him. So here we are. We're still on the Sabbath day, and we're still making this about the Sabbath. Now watch it. They see him in the synagogue. And not only do they see him in the synagogue, but here is somebody who's regularly in the synagogue, and he has a need. Now, they know what Jesus will do. Notice, the question is not if it is lawful. The question is it lawful? And they ask that because they know what Jesus is going to do. What's Jesus' MO? How does he work? What drives him? What's his motivation? It's compassion. So they know right away Jesus is going to look on this man. He's going to have compassion on him. He's going to heal him. We've got him. Now you contrast in the attitude of Christ and with their own. They have seen this man every week. They're not having compassion on him. Even in this situation, we can see that. You would think, it's like, oh yeah, here's somebody who has a need. Jesus, heal him. But instead, they would try to withhold that. They would try to keep that from this man. That's terrible. That you would have that kind of attitude. But they're showing themselves. They will accuse based on their own misunderstandings, ignoring that while they rest, that in fact God is still at work. He said unto them, What man shall there be among you that shall have one sheep, and if it fall into a pit on the Sabbath day, will he not lay hold on it and lift it out? Again, we see the Pharisees making their own excuses. How did Jesus know to respond this way? Because he knows that this is what the Pharisees are doing. He knows that this is the law, this is the interpretation that they are putting on the law. Oh no, you can't go out and pick out corn if you're doing the work of God. But if you've got a sheep that fell into the ditch, yeah, go get that. Now why would they allow that? What is a sheep? Huh?
Money.
It's money. If this individual loses that sheep, the Pharisees run the risk of losing that money. Oh no, we can't have you losing your livestock, because you've got to give that over to the temple, remember? So yeah, go out, get that sheep out of the ditch. Now their interpretation is not all wrong, it's their motivation. So here we are, we're right back in Matthew chapter 6. The Pharisees' motivation, where's their treasure? It's on earth. Jesus already said, lay not up for yourselves treasure upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasure in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through or steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Now do we see why Jesus taught this? We have it being exemplified right before our very eyes. Here are the religious leaders, and they're more concerned about a sheep than they are their fellow man. Then Jesus raises the question, how much then is a man better than a sheep? Of course man is more valuable than a sheep. Man is made in the image of God. Wherefore, here's the conclusion, it is lawful to do well or good on the Sabbath days. Do you get to ignore God's other laws so as to honor a specific law? Is that how we're balancing? Is that how we're interpreting? No, that's not. The Pharisees, or excuse me, the priests do good on the Sabbath day. God does good on the Sabbath day. So when it comes to, what if I saw a person's house on fire? Oh, it's the Sabbath day. Can't do anything about it. You've missed the point. And so the question needs to be asked, is our being here today, does it affect our values of life? And affect how we will live tomorrow? Will covetousness corrupt my attitude toward others? If so, then I need to study better. I need to study this more diligently. And to raise the question and ask ourselves, is there anything that's out there that's more valuable than a soul? Now here's an area where our brethren get themselves into trouble. I had brethren, while I was at preaching school, there was a Wednesday night, or there was sometime during the week, I got invited to another assembly, to a denominational assembly on a Wednesday evening. And my classmates started coming around to me and started saying, well, I don't know that you should go, because while we're here, we're supposed to be under this eldership, and this eldership says you need to be here on Wednesday nights. What's the problem?
Sacrifice rather than mercy, trying to go fish for a soul.
Why are we coming together on Wednesday nights? To go and, yeah, exactly. To go out and help other people. Now, I have the chance to go out and help other people, and you want to hold this against me. It's not what it's for. You're missing the point. Now, the eldership never said anything to me. But if the eldership had, this is the argumentation I would have used. And even with the Wednesday night assembly, what is the Wednesday night assembly?
Commanded in the Bible.
It's not a commandment of God. That's something that you've regulated, which is fine. It's good. But it's lawful for me to do good on this day. And so I'm going to do it. And you should not be putting yourself in a position where you're pitting this one thing against another. But that's what brethren do. And the reason why they do that is because of the very problem that we're looking at here. Oh, well, we've made this rule, you need to follow it. Can't start doing that. Otherwise, you're going to put yourself in here. Now, Jesus takes it a step further in John 7:22. Jesus raises the question, is it lawful, or he gives a statement, it is lawful to do well on the Sabbath days. Notice what else the children of Israel were doing on Sabbath days. Moses therefore gave unto you circumcision, not because it is of Moses, but of the fathers. And ye on the Sabbath day circumcise a man. Now, Jesus then raises the question. If a man on the Sabbath day receives circumcision, that the law of Moses should not be broken, are ye angry at me because I have made a man every whit whole on the Sabbath day? You see, you're willing to take something away from the man. I'm willing to give something back. And you want to condemn me? No, I'm doing the very thing that the Sabbath day is designed to do. Judge, oh man, I didn't make a note of this. I meant to ask somebody to quote John 7:24. And then I was going to ask, but do we know the context as to where this statement is made?
John 7:20.
Well, now we do, because I did it backwards. You see, we pinpoint verses. It's like, oh, we know this verse, but do we know why Jesus said it? Here's the backdrop of it. Judging according to appearance, but not judging righteous judgment. Here they are, and they're looking at Jesus, and He's healed on the Sabbath day. And you want to condemn Him. But you see, that's according to the appearance and not righteous judgment. If you were actually being fair, then you would recognize, oh, He's doing the same thing we're doing. We circumcise on the Sabbath. So why would we condemn Him for making a man whole? It's because your judgment isn't fair. You're judging from prejudice, not from what the Scriptures actually say. And so we need to make sure that we are remembering these elements even when it comes to our assemblies. Us being here today, and the fact that it is a reminder of the mercy that we need. Then what about if I saw somebody on the side of the road and they had a flat tire? Oh, I can't stop. I've got to get to assembly. You've missed the point. Now, I'm not to forsake. I'm not to neglect. But at the same time, I'm not to get into this position to where I start withholding my actions of good for this. They're supposed to work together. Now, that may seem like a difficult concept to get a grasp on just because of how much emphasis that we do put on, okay, you need to be here, you need to be here, you need to be here, you need to be here. You do need to be here. But then we that are emphasizing, those that are in leadership that are emphasizing, okay, you need to be here, need to be here, what do they also need to recognize? There's going to be reasons as to why you may not be here. And thus, it ends up presenting the full circle. It ends up presenting the full picture. Even under the Old Testament system, so every 3 years you had to come, and specifically you had to be there for Passover, Pentecost. But what if something prohibited you? What if something kept you from coming at that specific day, at that specific time that God commanded?
God had a backup plan for them.
Not many people know that in the law, God actually had another day that people could come and make that up. What does that show? It shows mercy. God understands that even though you're supposed to be here at this time, everybody's not going to be able to make it. Here's how you can make it up. Now, if God can do that for them, how do we need to be with others? We need to be the same way. Now, I understand what the danger is. The danger is that individuals will try to take advantage of that mercy. And you can't do that. You can't look at this and go to the extreme of Romans 6. Well, there's so much grace, then let's just let sin abound. We're supposed to be merciful on the Lord's Day, then I can just skip out for any reason that I want to. No, you can't start doing that. But at the same time, we cannot allow that fear of abuse and the fear of taking advantage cause us to close up what's supposed to be reminding us of. So with that, stopping at verse 12, pick up verse 13 where Jesus actually does heal the man. Are there any other thoughts, questions, comments surrounding what we're looking at here? All right. Nothing else? Take a short little break, a little pause, and get things switched over.